and move to part 2 of my own experiences from Myanmar context. Irrawaddy is the southern part of Myanmar, and these are the photos that when I did my field work. This, you may see the ship here. It's not even a ship, a big boat stuck there. This boat has been, in fact, flushed into this area from the other side by the storm. The storm, or Cyclone Nargis, still is recorded as one of the deadliest cyclones to hit Asia since 1991, killing a lot of people and a lot more missing, and affecting about 1/3 of them and the number of residents in the 37 townships. So it's a huge cyclone. And after which, this KBF and SA project, what I say, YTK, Yedingong area, DRL project, what I call. This is just a brief summary of the project, what they did. Korean NGO from, of course, with the Korean aid, the Korean NGO was in that area, went to this area. Firstly, they did humanitarian relief projects, distributing humanitarian support packages to immediately meet the humanitarian needs. But then after which, they stayed on and they come up with these ideas about how to reduce. The aim of this project was, in fact, to reduce vulnerability and address disaster risks effects, and increase the capacity in particular. So in fact, in all, the project was consist of 2 parts. One is infrastructure. So they built evacuation shelter, which is going to be was going to be also serve as a school. And then they also provided some emergency relief materials to be kept at the community level. We are talking about very remote area where, well, I could share some photos later on. But most of that, their activities were concerning about training. So they trained some selected community people and community leaders so that they will teach the community people themselves and how to evacuate, when to evacuate, how to read the warning signs, and etc. And village development, village disaster management committee was organized, which is something additional. It could be something additional, or like on top of using the existing village development committee, because usually in many countries, including developing contexts, they do have village level, committees where mostly senior and kind of leaders from the villages and communities will make an important decisions for the community themselves, right? And also they've made some teaching materials, guidebooks for teachers as well as students. All these were main activities. And I was, again, to tell you that as an expert, researcher, and I was invited to overview these activities and to come up kind of conclusions, whether how effective this project has been, and also come up with some suggestions if applicable. Right? So as a researcher, then the next question is how I'm going to evaluate, because I'm not the one who designed the project. I'm sure that especially for future researchers and students, maybe reading MA and PhD, you have to have your own framework by which you're going to evaluate, right? So, but I decided to use Sendai framework. Sendai framework is still a valid global framework kind of on DRR, disaster risk reduction, or DRR area. which was agreed globally at Sendai in Japan. This is why in 2015, so this is why we call it Sendai Framework, or Sendai Framework Diola, abbreviation is used. Okay, so from the they have 4 priorities, but I used only 3 of them. The first one is understanding disaster risk. So to what extent, actually, just briefly to share with you, like, what extent this particular project contributed to increasing the understanding of disaster risks among the community. So because this is not the national level, the project was done in the commune level, addressing back then 19, if my memory is correct, it's 19 villages. And the second one is to strengthening disaster risk governance. So here, governance could refer local, regional, and national level. I looked at the national level, the policies, to what extent it has changed, and etc. But as a limitation of my research, because it was done, quite quickly, in a very short period of time, and the field work was limited in terms of days, and I couldn't really meet the government officials. And because the project was on the local government level and the commune level, one of my personally also like interest about was about the community level. So it was not intended to meet officially with the government officials. So it was based on mostly secondary databases. And but when I looked at in terms of governance, I tried to look at also within community level governance as well. So who is sitting on the community level, who represents the village level, and to what extent actually genuine participation is taking places. That kind of question was thrown. And the third points, actually third priorities on the Sendai framework is about investment, material and financial investment around and after the disasters. But it was very clear that the context that we are dealing with is far remoted, where you can say that the existence of any substantial government support was near to none, at least while I was observing. So investment, that's dimension has been excluded from the very early stages of my evaluation. And the fourth one, the last one, is about building back better and enhancing disaster preparedness for effective responses. Here, anticipatory rather than responsive approach should be considered, and also participation, because I truly believe in most of my research is about participation, because I believe that without participation from local actors, any development cooperation could not be sustained. With the strong-willed and good-willed donors and external actors' engagement, may be able to boost local participation while they are there, while their aid and support is present. But once donors' side pulls out or exits from the local context, who's going to maintain all these initiatives? That should be on the local side. So local participation, that's I truly believe, should be the key element for any sustainable development projects. Okay, so for that, this is the planned, in fact, research methods. But as I said earlier, I could not meet officials, and some interviews are quite limited because of the language barriers. And I have to totally, as a external researcher, you have to accept, you have to compromise what's the limitations of what we could do in the local context. This is why another thing that I keep emphasizing whenever I have this kind of talk is that you have to find a trustworthy and capable local partner, without which there is much constraints that you have to go through as an external researcher, right? But look, but this is, if you're interested in this research, I have publications last year, so please do have a look. But briefly, this is what I found. I did a survey as well as interviews. So this is kind of combination again of different methods. And what we first, in terms of survey, I've looked at project villages to compare with control villages. Well, control villages will be about surrounding other villages than this, the villages that was benefiting from the project. But noteworthy finding is that indeed, in terms of understanding of disaster, in terms of, in a way, capacity, was, as you can see, the huge differences, more able, they find themselves now more confident to deal with this kind of storms. So we could see the noticeable differences, so which is positive results indeed, and especially most the families from project villages, quite naturally, because they were trained of what disaster is, what climate change is, what they have to do, and etc. So they were talking about within back their home, they were talking with families that's where to evacuate, when to do, where to meet if storm hits the area, and etc. Relatively speaking, I mean, compared to the control villages. And they did have evacuation plan or shelter and meeting place for families and contact list, emergency supplies, and etc. So we found quite positive from the surveys. And but from this qualitative interviews, this is me like 3 years ago, meeting with the village people with my translator back then. And I was interested, as I said, participation issue as issue. The selection of villages a priority, for example, because the project comprised the different villages. But within villages, who participate in this making decision, who should be participating in the training, for example, or where the evacuation shelter should be constructed, because it was not on each village, and how, to what extent, like the use of local knowledges was effective, and that all this interesting question were discussed a little bit, and but I found most activities at the VGLC was pretty much post-disaster situations, what they did afterwards. And still back then, I mean, when I was interviewing them, not much preventive measures were being discussed. They would meet at the village level only when the warning was being sent to the villages, rather than talking about what we could do, and for example, to climate adjusted farming system and etc. So it was pretty much limited in a way. And after all, training and awareness campaigning, yes, it's not necessary, but it's not sufficient, because people will still respond that, what would you do if another such a storm hits the villages? Well, where the evacuation shelter was built, yes, they know that they can evacuate there. But where there is none, then the answer is still, I have to climb up the trees. What else I could do? But of course, hopefully, thanks to this project, because these villages are connected by boat, you have to take the boat, and hopefully they will be receiving the warning signs in good enough time so that they could evacuate to the next two villages where they could be sheltered. But if it's late, there's nothing else that's just climbing up and holding the trees. Okay, the context is still there. They are collecting the water from rain for the everyday use. This is for the water collection and the jar as well. No water, no piped water, no indoor toilets, no electricity, and no solid roads, and etc. So training and awareness campaigning is very important, yes, and it turns out very effective, at least from this project. But we have to move on further. And what some of the conclusion and thoughts afterwards relates to as a researcher as well, how should we properly measure, even before the project is set, resilience? What do we mean resilience? And to make a participation genuine and accessible, for everyone, that's important for me in particular. And DRL, this project was a DRL project, kind of categorized as a DRL project. But what I found is that DRL should be, yes, mainstreamed, but it should go hand in hand overall development project with a long-term perspective. As if you provide aid for just 1 or 2 years, usually DRL is somewhat like in between humanitarian and long-term development interventions. So they don't really have more than few years funding to support this kind of projects. But what if they just exit out of that? Not really substantial changes would occur in that particular local context. So what I suggest, in fact, I'm aware of, and some of you are aware of, about now humanitarian development and peace triple nexus, so to speak. We have to think about when disaster hits, usually immediate humanitarian intervention takes place with lots of aid coming through globally. This should be linked to the long-term development project. Also, when we do now implement any long-term development project, we should also bear in mind that DRL, because now, as I said earlier, disaster occurred by natural hazards or climate change in particular should be part of development project. So I'm talking about mainstreaming of DRL in the development context. These can no longer be separatable, to my understanding. Like gender, for example. Gender is cross-cutting issues, mainstreamed. It should be mainstreamed regardless of sector-wide development. We do have, for example, health-centered development project or education-focused development project. But gender should be mainstreamed. Part of every different types of, in terms of sectors, for example, development project. Talking about beyond of that, and sector-wide development is being currently more like criticized increasingly, because I also believe that integrated or so to speak, holistic approach of development, because we can't just address, say, by building up hospital and then exit. Well, we need nursing and doctors to be educated to run this hospital in a sustainable manner. And we need like people's awareness also why taking kids to the, to the vaccines and etc. is needed. So everything should be approach in a very holistic and comprehensive way. And I'm arguing that disaster risk reduction should be like this way, like as part of comprehensive development project. And the last thing is about stakeholders. What would be the role of local NGOs, international NGOs, and the government roles to scale up? Because after all, INGOs may be in partnership and in collaboration with the local partners, starting with a small size of project and the local level. But after all, they have to work with the local governments. And if this particular project turns out successful, it could be scaled up. And that could only be possible along with the other neighboring local governments and maybe regional and national governments and public support. So only when these things are scaled up of development projects takes places, I believe that external donors can exist with a confidence that a local can now maintain and continue what they have initiated, perhaps, hopefully with communicating with the local partners. Okay. And lastly, the role of academia and researchers like myself, hopefully that I will be contributing to the rights framework and data collection and analysis and advising and advocating all this. All right, moving on to part 3. This is my previous experiences. In fact, I'm stuck there still. So when I earlier, in fact, the 2 years ago, when I applied for this research funding, I had in mind this coming back to this Myanmar to continue with this particular communities or maybe neighboring communities, and I wanted to see the changes my own eyes, and I wanted to, as I said, I wanted to bring like a appropriate framework, and that could be applied to the projects, and there I started working my own, and as an outcome, I started teaching like a disaster resilience from last semester and community development, community participation approaches, which also serves kind of literature review for me. And for building back better is one of the frame actually we could use. But what does that mean? And especially the term of resilience is going to be an important concept. But here, this one is from, okay, this one is from this source. And when this disaster hits, often we have humanitarian relief and restore basic services and assess maybe recovered and reconstruction takes places. After all, what we would like to achieve is building back, but not necessarily building back to the past, to the previous stages, but hopefully back better. Right? So for that, we need to understand what we want to achieve afterwards. It's this building back better concept refers to resilience. What does that mean? This is from UK Department for International Development. But I have another, but this refers to the ability of countries, governments, communities, households to manage change by maintaining or transforming living standards in the face of shocks and stresses, or continue to develop without compromising their long-term prospects. So this is the concept of resilience. Then you may ask that this is very similar to the development, what we want to achieve. This is the development. This is the resilience, right? So nothing really very different from each other. And what we have to understand then, we go down like with this concept, how we could be able to measure that. So from IFRC again, a resilient community is defined as a knowledgeable and healthy and can meet its basic needs, socially cohesive, has economic opportunities, and well-maintained and infrastructure and services, manage natural assets and connected. All this is the development, holistic approach of development, what we would like to achieve. Right? If you search what's the meaning of resilience, you will find many. But after all, what I understand is the development, in fact, what we would like to achieve. It's a very multi-dimensional concept of development. And here is another one. FRA stands for the Flood Resilience Alliance, a tree-based alliance. Approaches resilience in 5 capitals, in C capital and 5 C's. One is human, so human development, education, health, and skills. Social capital, social networking, how they bond each other and when they help each other in terms of difficulties and hardship. And physical capital, so in infrastructure and equipment and tools and etc. And we have natural disaster, capitals also, to use natural resource base, land productivity, water and other sources. And financial, in to what extent they have financial assets when they, etc. So this is this is the basis what I draw for my research proposal for the current one, that I'm going to use this framework from flood resilience, in particular flood resilience FRLMC. It stands for Flood Resilience Measurement for Communities. FRLMC definition of resilience similar. It reads the ability of system, community, and society to pursue its social, ecological, and economic development and growth while managing its disaster risk over time in a mutually reinforcing way. So this is what exactly I want to apply. Development and disaster as, reinforcing way. If we can measure the level of development or resilience before the project, and we do a certain project in the meantime, and if we could measure after the project, we could definitely argue that this project has been very effective and contributed to increasing the community resilience at the end of the day. Right? This is what I suggest and I'm doing at the moment. I'm in the middle of, in terms of, this is 3-year project, but I designed it to take it in Myanmar, but because you probably know since early this year, the political instability didn't really was something that I could control of, so I have to pull out, and so now we are working in Cambodia. But briefly, the tool is going to be like that. We are going to collect the community data using the different methods based on the triangulation of different methods. And the FLMC has well established, in fact, different indicators and 44 sources of resilience they do have under the earlier mentioned 5 C's. And after which we are going to kind of qualitatively, based on this both quantitative and qualitative data combined, and we do decide and determine qualitatively based on the communication and meetings with the local partners, we assign some kind of grading on the village or communities to examine kind of. So we are going to have this type of visualization of the outcomes later on. at the moment, so we are at the very early stages of designing. But when we design, I particularly interested in community participation again, because we want to work with rather than for people. And as I truly believe that they should be considered as agents of change, not us as external actors. So how to ensure inclusion of different voices and narratives of communities, not just hearing and listening to the leaders, so to speak. And this is why, like, as a methodology from the FLMC frame, we are going to have also FGI, focus group interviews and discussions with a different type of, for example, women group or disabled group or ethnic minority, if applicable. And so that participation can be meaningful and to raise confidence as well. This is my last, well, okay, at noon, my last slide. What I'd like to share at this stage is that we have, especially under COVID-19, I still don't give up the hope, and I still look forward to visiting in person in Cambodia soon, hopefully with this coming winter. But for that's certainly will depend on the permission from the local and Cambodian government, of course, because we have to, go by their quarantine and vaccination, all this safety check. And for this in particular, under COVID-19 situation, I keep emphasizing that global partnership is very much matters. And luckily, I have a good partner, and I'm working on with Habitat Cambodia at the moment. As a list, they are they're well known INGO with a certain level of capacity. Although I have to still acknowledge the limitation. Although we keep online and virtual communications every month, like this way, this situation, as you probably feel by now, it opens up other opportunities as well, because we are constrained to move and to meet physically in person, yes, but instead online there are so many informations are being flowed and shared. And if you just are willing to and you are open to the new opportunities, just click on that and you have tons of webinars available, right? So this is a new opportunity as well. But certainly for local data collection, there will be some limitations. I trust that, well, Habitat staff, relatively speaking, from the local context, they are well educated person. They can speak English, and some of them have master's degree, yes, but still I have to make sure that the quality of data collected, right? So, and I have to make sure, and we can't really, though, control like a perfect level of data to the level that I would have ensured if I could do my own or like a higher level of expertise my colleagues have. So that's the challenges. And also like practical challenges is this, the last 2 points. Delays. So we have to really have patience. But luckily, I'm not an actual implementer. I'm sure, and I have an empathy for example, Korean NGOs whose strengths, whose constraints should be much higher, much more than mine. Because I got this funding from National Research Foundation, of which rules are more relaxed than the actual aid project, for example. because then Korean NGOs for aid project, they have to report the donors, and donors may not be really flexible. And so constant communications should be made with the donor organizations, and hopefully that donor organizations will have more flexibility on this type of research. Okay, I will stop there. I'm sorry that I kept you after this 12 o'clock already. So I will stop there, and I'll be welcome any questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Professor Yang, for sharing your insight and in-depth knowledge in this field with our participants. I believe I have learned a lot today. You covered various issues. The climate change is already a big problem for the humanity. And on top of that, we now have to deal with the COVID-19. And the issues, related issues are so complex, and we can get easily lost in these rising issues and problems. But after listening to your talk, I realized that what is important at this moment is resilience, especially community resilience. You emphasize that a lot. And I gotta hope that we can build back a better world if we work together and if we stay resilient. So thank you so much. And why don't I invite some of the participants